Z homies, I hope y'all won't say I'm violating if I take a minute to glaze the late great Akira Toriyama for the span of this video. And I gotta do it because the more that I sit with Dragon Ball, the more certain aspects of it continue to blow my mind for real. Because the more I learn about Akira Toriyama's process, the more the reality that this man was not a planner. Bro, he described himself as somebody who didn't plan far ahead, who disliked complicated stories, and preferred making manga and stories that were just simple and fun. But the more I spend with Dragon Ball, the more you just kind of see this maze of psychological drama, developmental drama, trauma, philosophical themes, and it blows my mind. And the answer has to lie. The more I've been thinking about it, the more it makes me realize the answer lies in Akira Toriyama's intuition. This had to be one of the human beings with one of the wildest sense of just personal intuition possible, because through his just unconscious process, he was able to low-key be a master of character psychology, growth archetypes, and this Jungian stuff, and just dive into some stuff that are just straight up universal emotional truths, right? Where like one of his famous quotes was talking about, I don't think too much when I write. I just try to make it fun. He wants to make his stories fun, but within that, there's a humbleness to his approach. But within that, we have to understand that this man had some crazy intuition. He didn't try to be fake deep or force complexity into his stories. It came about naturally because of how well he knew his characters and the story that he was trying to craft. He let the characters be themselves, let them grow from their experiences and reflect, and he had an understanding of their emotional realities, even if it was an unconscious process. The more I sit with Dragon Ball, the more that becomes clear as day. Just thinking about some of the deeper character writing within the story, I think about Vegeta's inferiority complex. I know we've compared him to like Frieza, and just the wild way that these two characters mirror each other and the interesting ways that they're tied together within the story. And none of this is spelled out because he wasn't trying to do that, but every part of Vegeta's character arc feels like it makes sense. And it's wild that it does. Gohan's whole identity conflict with being caught between the Saiyan race and the human race, being a scholar versus the warrior that he has in his DNA, his genetics. And it's not this thing where Toriyama beat us over the head and was like, this is what I need y'all to see. We live it and see it through key moments of the way that Gohan behaves, the way that he evolves, the way time allows him to flesh out the character. And Piccolo's integration arc, we kind of talked about the Jungian archetypes and the ways that you can see that process, that shadow work, and how it perfectly mirrors the whole thing of like Carl Jung's individuation and being able to integrate the shadow. But again, Toriyama wasn't sitting there and decided that, yeah, so I'm gonna make Piccolo the perfect warrior, but then his shadow was gonna. He wasn't sitting there with all that nerd shit, man. He just knew his characters had something to say, and then it manifests in just the brilliance that we see in Dragon Ball. He wrote what he felt was right. His feelings, his emotions, all of it resonated in this way to craft something that's just greater than the sum of its parts and everything. And there's so much depth in the way that his characters reflect these personal mythos. And I'm not even talking about just like Sun Wukong and some of the direct things that certain characters are based upon, but the way you have Goku going back to the archetype things with Carl Jung, man, going back with Goku kind of being reflective of the self-actualized hero, the eternal child, or like the fool type of archetype that's constantly growing and changing. You have Vegeta with his inferiority complex that he's working through, and the way that being raised in a certain culture and the effects of trauma throughout a person's life, and the ways that can kind of stunt their growth, and the personal demons they have to work through in order to be able to move past that. We talked about Gohan and Piccolo, Trunks, man, surviving his personal apocalypse, in the way that growing up without his father and in the conditions that he was shaped him into a different kind of warrior than what his dad and we'll call him Uncle Goku were up to, man, when it comes to seeing fights and that fight for survival in a completely different way. It's so crazy how you have the works of just these great minds, man. I think of Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, all of these people that had these really deep things to say about the human condition, and they're wrapped up in some of these characters that we see in this freaking battle shonen. But Toriyama did not have that intent, man. He wasn't sitting here trying to lecture us about trauma or anything like that. But he was able to show, not tell, like being able to show how a boy like Trunks, who like grew up in hell, and what that does to you, man, and not talking about like having to dissolve your ego and everything like that, but the way ego dissolution is necessary for growth through Vegeta. Just talking about having to lose everything before you're able to become a person that's capable of handling and being worthy of things like love and peace and growing in the ways that you want to and all that. He just allowed his characters to exist, and he knew them on such an intimate level that it allowed them to blossom and become representative of these universal emotional truths that resonate with damn near anybody and any person, any place, and any time. And I think that that's why we see Dragon Ball reverberate the way that it does throughout so many different cultures, whether it be Asia, Latin America, Europe, the US. Like it's something that people everywhere can find something to relate to, man. Just thinking about what Dragon Ball has to say about stuff like fatherhood, and despite how it's marketed to like young boys, young kids, as he marketed the young shonen, right? It unintentionally becomes this almost a meditation on fatherhood through the lens of watching Goku and Vegeta grow, and then watching the effects of the people that they are on their sons, and watching the step pops, man. Everybody calls Piccolo that. Watching him step up into this mentorship role, and all of them keeping an eye on the younger generation and what they'll evolve into because of the significance that they'll play in the future. Just the Goku's flaws as a father, man. And we kind of talked about in a previous video about the different cultural interpretations of that, and some people liken him to a bum, some people liken him to a perfect father, and so much of that coming about depending on your core values and what culture that you come from. Gohan fighting through other people's expectations of him. Vegeta's arc basically being driven by the ghost of his dead father, which is so crazy, right? They go like his dead father, his race, and this intergenerational trauma. Same thing with Trunks. Like we see all these dynamics about intergenerational wounds, attachment wounds, masculinity, all of this stuff. But he was able to handle it with a level of lightness, because he wasn't trying to preach at us. He wasn't trying to give out some haughty message about, well, this is what I need the kids to learn. He wanted to make something sick. He wanted to make buff dudes punching each other, something that was fun, but within that desire, he made something so great. And then that the core of Dragon Ball with like growth, that within its narrative, there's subtext about personal growth throughout the entirety of the series from back to front, and not just about power levels, man, but like maturity, values, how your identity changes over time, and watching our favorite characters, man. Again, going back to Vegeta, going from like a genocidal maniac into a man who's able to freaking give his son a hug, take him to an amusement park, and settle down and even sacrifice his life for a planet that he once tried to take over or even destroy. Piccolo going from the literal demon, the embodiment of evil, into like the god of Earth realm, man, the nurturing mentor, this protective figure. Gohan and his struggles with his expectations of who he was born under, and trying to fight from under that shadow to find his own path, and Goku, who's the embodiment of relentless growth, man. Always who refuses to grow up in the traditional sense and be satisfied with good enough, but is constantly challenging legacy, challenging family death, all that craziness repeatedly. And again, we see this depth that just was not deliberate, man. It wasn't necessarily meant to be there what it is. And it's such a beautiful thing, man. Like, it's a commentary on lifespan development, you know, and like damn near Maslow's hierarchy of needs and some of this other insanity, man. And but it's wrapped up within the context of this manga, man, and it all coming from this one person's brain. So kind of just beginning to wrap up, man. That's the reason I feel like it resonates so deeply, is because Toriyama was not trying to be deep, man. He was trying to be sincere. He was trying to be honest. And that is something that we see that is so desperately missing from so much media. Y'all heard me talk a few videos back, man, about what makes Dragon Ball Z, I feel, different from Super. And this conversation of sincerity comes back up, and people understanding that it's okay to have something to say or craft a story the way that you want to without having to appease or preach to anybody else or feel embarrassed about what you have to say and like wrap it up in all these layers of irony. He allowed his characters to feel real high ass soap opera levels of emotions at times, right? But he also respects silent moments, right, where characters aren't always talking or having to have some kind of complicated dialogue. He respected his audience's intelligence, and he understood nuance, and there being things like, I think about Goku's face when he had to wipe out Frieza back on Namek, and how that facial expression by itself was indicative of so much about the way Goku felt in that moment. And that's nuance, man. That's like understating a moment and allowing a silence to just be and sit with the audience, and being able to build arcs not with these crazy text bubbles or speeches, but with decisions, with action. He creates the world. And the crazy part is that this allows the audience, the fans that continue to come back to it, people being able to revisit Dragon Ball as adults, to come at it from a different place than they did before, to see more than they did before. And I see that with so many great stories. I see that with Berserk, one of my favorite stories on the planet. Rest in peace, Miura. That's another story that I come back at different times in my life, and I get something different out of it every single time. And you see this with other texts that are timeless, you know, and I'm not trying to say that these stories are on the same level of these books that I'm about to mention, but I think about the Tao, I think about the Bible, I think about some of these Eastern philosophical texts, spiritual texts that have lessons that you can continuously come back to, because they're universal truths that evolve with you in some ways, right? As you change as a person, you come back to it different. And so with that new lens, right, with that new frame of reference, you read the material and you get something new out of it. It becomes timeless. And so Toriyama was just a master of his craft. You know, it's not like he was sitting there meaning to create a psychological epic, but his instinct, the instinct that he has, his understanding of the human condition, his relatability, his lack of filter, and just being able to be raw and honest about what he wanted to create, as well as the team that he had behind him. I know he had some great editors and some other people on board. All these people deserve their props. You know, he wasn't trying to preach to anybody. It was play. You know, and within that, he was able to dig into some truths that not many stories will ever be able to reach, man. And that's what makes Big Homie a genius, you know, not because he was out here trying to make people think he was one, but because he trusted the process. He trusted the story that he wanted to tell. He trusted the characters, and he stayed true to that. He was sincere about that all the way through. And that's where I'm going to close off, guys. I appreciate y'all sitting with me as I kind of worked my way through my thoughts on this, but so much props to that man, and the story he was able to craft, and something I hope to continue to be able to come back to. Thank y'all for being here with me. I'll mention the channel membership piece, early access to videos, some exclusive content on there, but really big props to anybody that comes in here and hangs out. But really, man, I got to give some special love to y'all who make this community what it is. Big shout outs to all my channel members, man. I thank you guys very, very much. So I'm going to sign off. I appreciate y'all as usual, and let me know what you think in the comments, man, because I know there's a lot of ways to interpret all of this, and I think that's what makes it special. So be easy, and I'll catch y'all again in the next video.